Through my journey into magic, myth, meaning, I have created personally a great understanding that there are models that we witness reality through.
These stories, right, there are ones that if we tell ourselves, they're not just mantras that we say, right? They become tattoos, so to speak.
Every major philosopher was also an alchemist, a magician, an occultist, and I think that is the most important thing for us to understand.
Oh, dear Diana, tell me why do the things that are beautiful always have a darker side? Oh, dear Diana, tell me why is the good never good enough? Underneath the dirt and scar is an old and familiar face.
All right, welcome back to The Ladder, Journeys in Platonic Mysticism. Today I have as my guest Brandon Lee, the host of a very interesting and rising podcast called Magus in the Middle. Not middle, I keep in my head. You remember that TV show, Malcolm in the Middle? Every time I want to say your show, in my head it's middle, and then it finally came out middle instead of media. Okay, sorry about that. Magus in the Media. And it is so titled because Brandon examines a lot of the occult and esoteric within media, right? I believe, if I remember correctly from one of your podcasts, that your journey into the esoteric began with watching The Matrix with your mother, which, as a 90s child, that's near and dear to my heart. No matter how bad the acting is, you got to watch it over and over and over again. And so I thought I would start there and ask you, like one of the ones that I thought was beautiful was The Legend of Zelda, but also a bunch of anime. And let's see, there was others. Oh no, let's just start there. I have, as a philosopher, lots of ways into how the Matrix reveals philosophical and esoteric wisdom. What were your kernels when you first watched that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Matrix for me was one like a very awakening for my younger teenage self, especially because of the idea that I didn't even know what it meant, or that it was a word, and that comes, that's gnosis, right? This direct experience, this Gnostic tome that we get by the Wachowskis. And as a kid, as I was seeing it, it was the whole idea is that there's this mundane world, the everyday world that we all go to our jobs, and it's the daytime, but then there's this nighttime kind of thing that happens where people are going out. Neo himself is a hacker. And little did I know that the book that he reaches towards and pulls out his stuff that he's selling to these underground rebels and radicals was the book Simulation et Simulacra by Baudrillard. And so for me, it was more like how in the beginning you get this idea about following the right white rabbit. And so it's this whole thing about being able to follow the little breadcrumbs down the rabbit hole. And we all know Alice as she falls asleep and then has this fantastic journey and then comes back up and is kind of different. That's what Neo goes through in this. And as a young man in the 90s myself, the idea was, and then I grew up on the farm in the middle of nowhere. I was trying to figure out there has to be more to life than just the simplistic, the normal everyday, just trying to feed and provide for a family. I was always like looking off in the horizon. Little did I know a lot of these themes in my youth would then come back to me. And so the Matrix is big for me because then when Neo is like trying to take his hero's journey and accepting that, he first doesn't accept it, and that's why he gets taken by the agents into this dark white room, and then is questioned, and then these strange supernatural magical things start to happen to him, like his mouth goes away. They put a bug into his belly button. Interesting enough, I don't have a belly button because I had a hernia at a young age, and so they took out my belly button. And so I've always felt this kind of Kyle XY kind of thing where it's like, am I an alien? Why do I have such strange thoughts as a kid? Why does it feel like no one else around me is questioning their existence like I am, like Neo does with everything? And then he meets his supernatural figure. He meets Morpheus, the king of dreams, or Lawrence Fishburne. And then that's when the whole thing starts off, because he then truly has to make a decision, right? He wakes up in his bed and then life goes on. And then the idea is that he has the question, the red pill or the blue pill. And I feel like this is a question that we're all continually asked. Are we willing to travel down the rabbit hole and follow the breadcrumbs, or do we choose to just live, a mundane life and not really ask the true questions, right? The unexamined life, as Socrates says, maybe not worth living, in so to speak. And so what happens when we start to examine our life? And it was these small little breadcrumbs like the Matrix, or like the Da Vinci Code, or all the different comic books that I was watching and reading, all the, The Hobbit when I was a young kid. I read as well. I read, Fahrenheit 451 as a young kid as well. And all these things were trying to show me that there is like a mystery to life. And if if you do certain things, certain results happen, or if you ask certain questions, or if you follow a certain path, you can end up in a place that you've always dreamed of but didn't really know was there.
Yeah, and so I love this idea, but it all begins with having to take seriously the mythologies that we create today, right? So not just the mythologies of antiquity or the esoteric stories about heroes' journeys and things like this, even the ones that aren't esoteric, like the ones that are popular, Odysseus, right? Still going to be in the movie theaters coming next month. Is it next month, I believe? Or
Who cares? It's probably not going to be good.
Yeah, I know. So sad. My son and I are reading the Iliad, and we're going to do the Odyssey right afterwards, and in order to
prepare.
Prepare. But in my heart of hearts, I'm like, it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
We can hope because the 2018, I believe, Troy Fall of a City did a really great job. So who knows?
Yeah.
So to get back to my question, you distract me with your media wiles. You have to take seriously what most people just consider entertainment. Why is it that we need to emphasize the value of watching these films and seeing them more than seeing them as invitations, seeing them as ciphers or symbols, even when the author or directors or producers aren't even themselves aware of it, or more interestingly, when they are aware of it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that for myself, as I started waking up to the magical, the hidden world that is around us, I started to realize that maybe it was myself who started leaving these little breadcrumbs, that I was trying to remember something that I had once forgotten. And I think that comes in the lines of when we're watching great art, great shows, great movies, reading amazing books, that these stories have a kind of eternal force, a certain kind of structure to them. Carl Jung would call, his archetypes of the collective unconscious. Joseph Campbell talks about it in all his things about his elementary ideas. But that these things are tapped into when the artist becomes, as Alan Moore talks about, when art becomes magic. And that is that they become synonymous. And these structures tend to then lead us into realms unknown by our conscious mind, by the embodied experience that we're living. And then all of a sudden what happens is something that is mere entertainment that's just meant to help us rest, relax, laugh, cry. It starts to become an existential experience. It starts to make us question our everyday notions about what is reality, what's it mean to be in relationship towards others. And to me, being more of I'm a Platonist myself, like yourself, a phenomenological Platonist, is that there are these forms, these forces of nature all around us, and why I don't want to lead it into something that's more like a panpsychism or purely psychological is because that's the point, is that it's a just like the mysteries of old, is that this is a completely embodied experience. That when you're watching something like The Matrix as a young kid with your mom sitting there, and you both are kind of like, oh my God, what is happening here? This is fantastic. My skin starts to get goosebumps. My nervous system starts to enact. All of a sudden, my mirror neurons in my mind, in my brain, don't know the difference between Brandon Lee and Neo, because I become the character. And I think that's really important, is that these then become experiences that we can tap into that maybe we've had in another life, another world, because reality is much more malleable than we ever want to experience. And I think that a lot of these great writers are discovering realms, other different realms, like J.R. Tolkien doing with Lord of the Rings. He's tapping into a different place and watching it happen instead of something that he is creating in and of himself.
I love that. Every time I write a story, the best ones are when I'm just watching the story unfold, right? Not making decisions, and because it just comes from the character. But this brings me to the Platonism aspect that you just mentioned, right? Plato in the Republic famously censored the poets, and now, of course, if this was the Danny Layne show, I would tell you what I think that really means, because we'd remind ourselves that that the Republic is an analogy for the soul, right? And so working on censoring what we believe is reality about the divine, the good, the true, and the just is an important aspect of being able to watch entertaining things, to watch a play by Aristophanes, or a tragedy by Euripides, or whatever new contemporary animated show, Spirited Away, or what it might be, right? That we can watch them and say, this I can let into my citadel, right? This I see what it's really saying, and so I don't need to, make this not in my heart of hearts, right? It's a process of, making sure that the films and the media that we consume doesn't enter into our reality unless we see the good, the true, or the just in it. See, I did it anyways. Sorry about that.
I love that. That was good. I agree.
But the reason why I preface that is because, do you feel that there are films or media that you see the esoteric, the occult, the philosophical, but not to let into your citadel, not to let them educate your soul in such a way that you believe and live and experience, or have that mirror neuron relationship with, that you might be tempted to, right? Because as a physical body, we cannot help but have our skin and crawl, and we could see the magical, or something, that points in the direction of the worlds that we have fallen into before. But, this one is not one I want in my heart of hearts.
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. I think that there are those things, right? As you were talking about with Plato, is that they want to censor the poets, but he himself was a poet, so thus the contradiction. And that contradiction can be, for me, easily aligned into our modern world, where there are things that I don't really enjoy. There's a lot of the occult film world happens to be integrated with horror. And so that's not my cup of tea. And so I'm not going to watch those types of things because I don't need those types of things playing within my mind. I already have, the dark things that go bump in the night in my own mind are already quite fantastic. And currently, I think when we go through the alchemical process of trying to integrate the shadow and disintegrate that dead ash that left around, why we write and why we speak and why we continue to learn, is because we're trying to take a machete to the nonsense. And I think Plato's talking about a lot of these things when he's talking about the tripartite soul, and how we need to obviously have the lower desires in complement slash in contrast with the rational mind. And then you have that courageous warrior caste in there that also has the ability to take the sword of reason to these things, which I think is really important. However, through my journey into magic, myth, meaning, I have created personally a great understanding that there are models that we witness reality through. And so technically, I don't think I'm as easily swayed anymore by media, because I can see the narration, I can see the narratives all around us. And I will state, in my younger years, when I was so I have degrees in philosophy and classical literature, as I was learning Plato and Aristotle and the history of philosophy as such, I was also practicing magic and experimenting with entheogens and cannabis. And these two things, I truly think they can be, as MK Ultra has taught us, techniques for consciousness change and also manipulation techniques. However, when used in consort with magic and mythology and understanding philosophy, which I think is the most important, I think then that your critical thinking skills, you're not easily swayed into being brainwashed and controlled by mainstream media advertising and marketing and the dark sorcerers of this dark republic that we live in, that are trying to basically manipulate and use us as vessels for the narration that they're trying to push, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And in fact, it helps me segue, if you don't mind, I'm a scholar of Neoplatonism. I do research in all these worlds, and, I would say I knew in my heart of hearts that I was a living, breathing, walking Platonist a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, as I always like to say. But what that really meant, as far as like embodied practice, really started to metamorphosize, if you will, about half a decade ago, where the relationship between the theories and the arguments, what the relationship between being a philosopher and a scholar and a professor, all of that just started to just blur, right? Much like the mouth, right? In the Matrix, to where there is this oh, okay, why not? Let's see what this esoteric world is like. Let's not avoid talk of theurgy anymore. Let's not let's not hide anymore that there's a little bit of woo-woo in your way of life, and that's beautiful and wonderful, because you know what? There's a little bit of woo-woo in Plato's life, and you know what? If it's good for Plato, it's good for me. And so that means going down rabbit holes that I had never expected. And over the years, I meet and encounter a lot of various different living esoteric traditions, that whether it be the Golden Dawn or Freemasonry or Rosicrucians, or things maybe I've never even heard of to this day, the magic of Aleister Crowley, all of it, right? I meet people, and sometimes there's a growing sense of, but those are the wrong kinds of those, right? And so this seems to be something that you're into, is what are the things that a budding occultist should be wary of, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. And the true answer to that is technically only your soul knows. Because the question that always comes to be asked is, what are the books that I should read to get me into magic and the occult? And that's really hard, because of my journey, and the books that I read are much different than what a lot of people do. Because one of the biggest books for me that is a deep dive, I think good for a scholar like yourself and for a lot of people, is actually going to come from our science fiction authors. And that name is Frank Herbert, and those books are Dune. And I think Dune does it so well because when you're tapping into the archetypes, when you're tapping into these characters and their feelings and their meaning and what they've been through, say like the Bene Gesserit with Jessica or the Mother Superior, you get Paul Muad'Dib, who's now trained by the Bene Gesserit, who are the like a motif of what the Jedi are, right? They are the mystery school adepts. It's a sisterhood. They go through the yoga, 8 limbs of yoga training where they're doing prana bindu and pranayama. And then from there, he's also got mentat training. So with Palinode, right? AI. And you get the Butlerian jihad. You get this idea is that you shall not make anything in the image of man's mind, but yet you still get these mentats who have the control of logic so well. You get your Spocks, and then you get Paul Muad'Dib, who is this amalgamation of that character. And so for me, it was like this was huge. And so now when you're venturing into the occult and the esoteric, there are a myriad of institutions, magical societies, mystery schools, and all these things that people are going to try to tell you that this is the authentic tradition. This is the lineage of all lineages. If you stray from the Golden Dawn and read Crowley, Crowley's a psychopath or a narcissist or these different things, and yet our people are the good ones, even though we still destroyed the Golden Dawn and it broke up into a million different pieces. And so it's like, okay, that's interesting. And then they're like, no, but the Golden Dawn, we got that kind of thing from the Freemasons. The Freemasons is not a magical society. It is a group of men who are, go through initiations, and they're just trying to make good men better. Where did that come from? Well, we got all kinds of shit made up that they're the Knights Templar or all these kind of things. None of that is actually true. We have a direct start of when that happened a few hundred years ago, and then beforehand, it's basically a myriad of things. Because why? Because history is made up. And so if history is made up, even though it has an objective history that moves through time, we have to understand that it is the models of how we view reality, our perspectives. And then it goes back to the Hermetic idea that we need to clean our nervous system brain interface with reality so we can actually take in this kind of detail to such an extent where our critical thinking and our intuition, the wand and the sword, are able to basically do what they're supposed to do and sift through our experiences so we can take in the correct golden thread, which goes back to the golden path of Paul that he takes through Dune, is that that through certain practices, certain things will happen. And if we don't have the lust for result, then we can continue these practices on and we will fall into, hopefully, the correct kind of lineage that is good for our soul. And that, I think, is what's most important. And so you just start picking up books that resonate with you. One of the first books that I picked up was actually The Book of Thoth by Aleister Crowley. And I, in the beginning of my philosophical career, was reading Aristotle and his Nicomachean Ethics at the same time as I had two other classes where I'm reading the Republic and writing papers on it, as well as then I had my classical literature stuff where then I'm reading, Dante. And so for me, the classics, I'm a classicist. So these classics are what are basically laying the foundation for this boy who was trying to dream of something more. And so that kind of goes back to the idea is that I think institutions have their time frame, and then just like all institutions, like the dark night of the soul, the king becomes a tyrant and they hold on and hoard knowledge too long. And then anybody who takes that knowledge out into the world is like, I think we need to publish this before it gets lost. And then you get these people who are like, no, we can't do that because of the plebes. And I'm all like, it's not for you to say, we then get these renaissances and these periods, right? The Mysterial Ficinos who are like, we need to make the hermetic stuff come out first. And we're going to leave Plato behind for a second because these seem to be more important. And we just continue. So there's a golden thread in the Western esoteric tradition that stems all the way back from the Sumerian, Babylonian times and before, I would state, and that through time, the idea is just to pick up the books and not get trapped in the myopic trap of thinking that this is it. Because as Aleister Crowley wrote in one of his most famous essays, The Soldier and the Hunchback, we will always have more hunchbacks than soldiers. There's always more questions than answers.
Yeah, Nietzsche said, even nature desires a herd, right? Desires the blinking cow,
Yeah.
which that means we have to also appreciate the beauty of, the hunchback or
Yeah.
the kind of motley cow. For me, it's one of the reasons why, I can watch just about anything, whether it be a commercial or
Yeah.
something that is even made without intention, and be like, nope. I can see some kernel. I always use the idea of kernel, but the idea of a golden thread, that's also in Plato, right? In the
Yeah.
Ion, where it says, look, if you speak eloquently enough, right, you've picked up on that thread, that beautiful inspiration of Homer.
Yeah.
And then you speak in such a way that the audience can be connected to the gods, because Homer was inspired by the gods. And so the importance of threading, right? You're right, going all the way back to Sumerian mythology. Like this, what we're doing is we're continuously working on that tapestry. And again, this is a very feminine image, because
Yeah.
typically women who were the weavers, the sewers. So yeah, speak to
Fates.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fates, right? Ariadne,
Yeah.
in the stars, because Dionysus fell, right? They have this golden
Oh yeah.
boy who falls for a mortal woman, and can't help but see her and her grief and her abandonment,
Yeah.
her refusal to believe that the world is as corrupt as goodness Theseus is, and ready to go off into this other world. And so this is again another long-winded way for me to say, all right, you said you were a classicist.
Yeah.
Myths, right?
Yeah.
In your heart of heart. So I love the fact that you appeal to Dune, because for me, the prequel, the television show, the prequel, where
A legacy. Dune Legacy is.
yeah, you get to
It was
see.
actually great. I like that.
Yeah, no, I was so impressed. It was
Yeah.
one of those. I really did think it was going to be not so great. I mean, the movies
Yeah.
are cool, they're wonderful, but they're very long, and
Yeah.
you
I
know, and
actually
if-
hate the movies. I'm hot take. I dislike the movies.
You can, I'm totally fine with that. I mean, Timothy Chalamet, come on. If only it's some better actor. But the point is that I'm fascinated by the way the women and the priestesses
Yeah.
communicate through this esoteric way of speaking
Yeah.
that's powerful, but also the movement of hands and all of these various different things, which I believe is what women have been doing for thousands of years in order to survive, but not just that, in order to pass on this golden thread to each generation. That part of what it means to be within this world is to know, come what may, we have to figure out our clever Magus-like ways of continuing to thread this beautiful, magical, more than, but not more than in the sense of transcendent, more than in the sense of like your life can be lived in a way that seems impossible, right? Once you internalize, and not just internalize, but make a shield or make your body and your mind, not just representing these things, but living these things. And so, again, another long-winded way of getting back to the question, which is, what myths, light that journey for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's actually a hard one because of it. When it comes down to it, a lot of these myths are more modern myths for me. Like when I was young, like I said, I think Harry Potter. I read The Hobbit. Fahrenheit 451. A lot of science fiction and fantasy. And then the older I got, getting into the Da Vinci Code and these things. And then when I was taking my courses, you go back and all of a sudden you're reading, Dante all the way. You're reading The Golden Bough by Fraser, and you're just doing all these things. And so for me, it was when I tapped into Joseph Campbell, and his Hero with a Thousand Faces, and then all of his books is technically when all of a sudden mythology expanded for me. I read Power of Myth, and that was his Bill Moyer conversation. And I read that book, and I was all like, wow, there is a lot going on here. I thought myths were lies. I thought they were like made up fabrications of things, until you come to realize that myths are more than that. They're actually stories that hide deeper truths, and that symbolism is something that isn't just a concrete fact like a stop sign telling you to stop and giving you data, but when unpacked, it gives you a layer of meaning that stands outside the rational mind. And it goes back to like Plato in his in the Phaedrus, right? Socrates is like actually pleading to the muses, being like, I'm so sorry, I've erred against you. I can't believe I would do that. Let me tell you again what I actually believe this this relationship between the lover and the loved truly is. And that is, when I read the Phaedrus, actually read that for one of my classical literature, for one of my literature courses, it actually blew my mind because I was like, wow, these are questions that really need to be asked. What is this lover and loved? And so it's like another one of the great mythological resources for me was when I read Sandman by Neil Gaiman for the first time.
Nice.
And that I think that that novel is one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest series of all time. No matter what, tragedy befalls Neil and our, lower desires and all these things. But it's like really important to see past some of those things, because when real stories move us, that is when we can start to truly question and find meaning within the landscapes of our own mortality. Because I think that magic isn't about transcending who you are. It's about finally becoming fully human. And that is the true magic of the world. And so for me, it's like the older I get, even to this day, we read all of the different manga and comic books and, these modern myths of today. I know a lot of people may disagree with me that then those aren't as good as some of the classical mythologies of the time frames, like say, but
right?
it's different. It's different,
Our generation, right?
Like, yeah, exactly. Like Milton's Paradise Lost. The first time I read that in my literature class, I was like, wow, what is going on here? And truly asking these questions. But then it's about the time frame, because I think the hermeneutics of the historicity of things is really important. So it's like I live now, and so myths have to translate from what means something to me in this world. So at that time frame, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and these types of things. And then as I get older, I realize actually the East and the Japan and South Korea, China, they're actually recreating these mythologies, and they don't seem to be propagandizing us, because we have to remember Milton in Paradise Lost, he was trying to propagandize his people because he was, a devout Christian at that time frame. The king had just died. And so he's writing kind of like a satire slash an exposition about like, look at this Lucifer character, and yet it got out of his way, and he's all these people are like, oh, Lucifer's cool, like he destroyed the tyrant god. We have a tyrant king that is going on this time frame. So that's a shout out to Peter Gray and his Lucifer Praxis and Princeps. It's he's got great work going on. And so for me, the modern myths of this day, I think, are truly telling us exactly what is going on, not only within our own mind, but what's happening out in the world. And those people who are writing those really good stories are tapping into more than just social, cultural propaganda. And so the mythologies, like we talked about, Neo, the Matrix was one of the greatest mythologies as a kid for me, because I always wanted to learn Kung Fu, Years later, I'm a Kung Fu teacher, and I've done mixed martial arts for a very long time. And so I was able to take this thing of watching somebody be able to download skills into their brain, and then do it in the world, and it goes back to Baudrillard and his simulations et simulacra. It's like, okay, that book was there. Well, why? Well, because the Matrix is the simulation of the desert of the real, this thing, this land that has now been so corporatized and tokenized, as we're seeing today, that it has basically been destroyed because of we blocked out the sun. Well, what's that mean? Did we know that Bill Gates would come out in the Forbes articles and state that he thinks that we should block out the sun? And it's like, you can go find that article online right now, but that's exactly how the Matrix was created when you watch the Animatrix, is that we thought it would be a great idea as humans in the Matrix realm to block out the sun, and that would stop the machines from being able to have their energy source. Little do we know, humans use the sun as well. And so that's so symbolic, even in the Platonic sense, of what happens when we try to block out the sun, when we try to get rid the world of the good and the Platonic forms that are expressing themselves from the good. And then what doesn't get stated in the Plato, in the Republic, as much as I think it should, is that what happens when the sun goes down? The celestial. You get to see the interconnected nature of all things and these stories that are representing themselves through forces of planetary energies onto our consciousness. And then it's not just consciousness, and that's the phenomenological perspective, but it's the idea that I'm continually intending something through my perceiving apparatus, through my perceptions onto objects. And it's a continual relationship. So then consciousness becomes a relationship. So these mythological stories become a relationship to me in the world, which is what I think is the problem with a lot of stuff, is that we abstract all these things, especially in the magical occult communities, in the ivory tower of the academics. We want to make all these abstractions instead of living life, the best life we can.
No, I think that is gorgeous. So when you talked about the Republic, I just wanted to point out to people that the Republic actually takes place. It's a panpsychis. It takes place at night because he's leaving the day festivals and things like this, and that, going back to Athens, and it's caught, and then they go to Cephalus's little encampment thing, and then so the whole of the Republic is narrated with the stars, and so that when you get the analogy of the sun to the good, like you hit the power of that, as you know, they're in the darkness, right? And then, which the allegory of the cave is then followed up with the astronomy, or the importance of astronomy, as he goes through the various different forms of mathematics. And I always love picturing that all of them have decided to just lay back as Socrates is talking about the value of astronomy and looking at the stars. And then by the time you get to the myth of right, like they've just spent all night, telling these stories, having these feasts of words. And now you've got the spindle of necessity and the sirens, and allowing people to visualize, this value of not just the sun, but the space of stars and the space of the world soul and all of this. And so that, for me, this is a myth, right? Plato is giving us a noble lie, one that if we bring in, because all lies, I want the true lie as a good Nietzschean and as a good Platonist. Like these stories, right? There are ones that if we tell ourselves, they're not just mantras that we say, right? No. They're not abstractions. They become tattoos, so to speak, burned on us. And so something like, for me, I know this sounds a little crazy, but for me, the Legend of Zelda is burned on me. The importance of going to find that fae who is going to replenish my heart, or knowing that I've got to break some walls that normally I shouldn't do, right? In the real world, don't break walls, right? But if you do as Link, then maybe you'll get to go gambling, or maybe you'll get some potion. See, I still remember it. It's part of my strange little character. And it's the same reason why I think it's, my kind of personality is to want to puzzle things out and save the girl in the end.
Of course.
And then also as she grows up. And so this is what I love about myth, right? And this is why when people tell me that certain franchises have been ruined because they did X, Y, or Z, or things like this, I'm like, no, this is just somebody else's story. And maybe somebody didn't get it. And so they messed with the story a little bit, but they had their reasons for it. So the hermeneutics of all of this, right? Of being able to change, being able to have our stories grow and become otherwise. Where do you see this? Where are your favorite adaptations? Where, like with Milton and Paradise Lost, we get, the Golden Compass. I believe that's what that series was called. What adaptations?
That's good. I love Golden Compass. That actually that's a good reminder that when I read his Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, who supposedly is an atheist, and when you read that, I'm all like, I think we need to reassess what you mean by that.
I think one of the most inspiring films to faith was made by an atheist. It's called Jesus Christ Superstar. Anyways, just wanted to throw that out
hilarious.
there.
No, and so in that's a Gnostic tale, right? Is this idea of there being more to this world. We have our souls, but instead they're external to us in these animal forms when we're naive and innocent in our youth. Our animus, our animals can change forms into whatever they need, and then through time, as again, the concreteness of the adult experience, right? Very William Blake, Innocence and Experience, in his Heaven and Hell poems. And this idea is that we as adults become myopic. We concretize everything. We want to make everything into some kind of thing that we can analyze and try to actually suck the life and substance out of all things. And that happens in all aspects of our world, especially in the occult world, especially in the philosophical, in the academic world, where we get the separation somehow during the Enlightenment period, when all of a sudden you get continental thinkers and analytic thinkers, where it's all like, what happened just to being a thinker who's trying to live an examined life? And so to answer the question, yeah, Philip Pullman and his Dark Materials was amazing. That was one of my favorite series of all time, and it leads to the fact that you can read science fiction, you can read fantasy, and you can experience the mystical through those things, which is then why I think that the integration of philosophy, the integration of science fiction and fantasy, and then having the embodied experience, and why the mystical experience is so important, why entheogens were important on my journey, was because now it takes language and moves it into action and into the magical, instead of leading it into the abstract. The very early life of Wittgenstein and his Tractatus is that he, couldn't figure out how to bridge this gap personally, and when I was reading it. And what we end up doing with the mystical experience is that the subject-object dialectic, all of a sudden that line where it's, as for all you Cartesians out there, it's like, these are two separate substances and never the twain shall meet, and then there's God. What's he do? I don't know. And you're all like, okay, that doesn't, the cogito, it's great for the history of philosophy and mechanization of things. And so we have computers and the world we have, but now it's drained life out of all things, which is my issue with the postmodern world, which is my issue with postmodern storytelling, is that if you just throw splatter on a wall and then you change characters, why I don't like Dune, these new ones, is when, it's not Zendaya's fault, even though I think she's not a great actress, but the idea is that Chani as a character is like, she is not only the consort, but she is the feminine balance of a Paul, and she is there at all times for him. She wants to give him a child, but she also is a leader of the Fremen. She is the daughter of light kinds. She is a badass and also a high priest. She's all these things. Instead, what happens is, and it goes back to the Legends of Zelda, is in the beginning, we always hear it. Wake up, Link, wake up. And then he wakes up and he's this foolish little aloof boy who has to go on his journey with his little fey creature, right? The callback to the Socratic daemon, his genius that he was born with, which is why it's different than the holy guardian angel of the magical traditions. He's born with this thing. This thing in Zelda in Link comes to him, and he's pining after this thing as a masculine, as a boy, and it's like the feminine. How do and I can relate to that. It's like, I'm a romantic, I am a serial monogamist. I like having one partner. I find it's the sacred marriage that we find to in all things. That's no judgment on how people choose to live their life. But being alone and just being a person is hard enough, let alone having multiple. So it's like, but this idea is that, like, the same thing happens in the Matrix, where Neo has to wake up. He can't be living separate lives anymore. He has his main life that his job is going to shit because he shows up and he's pale and disheveled and been up all night trying to hack whatever it is. And what's he trying to do? He's trying to find out, what is the Matrix? That's what he's doing. And we all forget that as it shows up on the computer screen where it says, follow the white rabbit, wake up, Neo. It's the same thing as Link. And then once he does is he figures out the breadcrumbs that reality is giving him, because it seems like something is feeding from the outside in. And that goes back to my theory that I think that is what the logos, through the nous and the logos are interacting together to feed us information, like the remembrance of the Platonic knowledge, is that we're just trying to remember this. And for me, the first time I saw Plato's forms was the first time that I had my own metaphysical death and rebirth, when I took far too much, too fast, too soon, and listened to the band Tool at the same
Oh, that's
time.
right. I remember this. Yeah.
Because Tool plays their music based upon sacred geometry, and they tune all their instruments to that, and then you get the magician Maynard, who's writing his lyrics to the music, and then all of a sudden you get brought upon a mystical journey. And so to me, Tool as a band, if taken in the right light, and I was young, too much, too soon, too fast, sacred, I didn't know what sacred geometry was. This thing's just exploded in my mind's eye, and I had an apocalyptic thing happen to me. And then all of a sudden, as I was coming back to, I started just writing like a madman. And then I've been on this journey ever since, trying to figure out what was it, those things that I saw. And as Carl Jung talks about, as soon as we tap into the mystical experience, the synchronicities start to happen. And for me, I'm trying to say, follow those synchronicities, follow those breadcrumbs, because magic isn't about practical magic where it's like how to get a girlfriend, how to get a better job, how to find my keys. But what magic is about is it's about the great work. And so what goes back to the question with mythology, you know, Zelda, Kingdom Hearts was a video game of a boy trying to wake up and continually remember things as he's going off from an island into these realms where there's these secret societies. He's got a keyblade. So you get both the idea of opening the door, the door to the heart. And then if you take away the heart, people become nobodies. And so it's our storytelling has the ability to do something to us. And that's why Magus in the media, that's why I've created this thing as my outward extension to try to help people wake up and remember that there are signs everywhere. But the idea is that what we're looking for is the symbols, and these symbols do something to us whether we want them to or not. And so if you're, you know, it's one thing to know about Plato and all the fancy words, and I'm like, what does that do for your life if your life isn't getting better? You know, what is the point of magic if your vessel isn't clean and you can't run a mile? And not that I even like running, but if you can't interact with the world and see the twinkle in my eye as I am moving through things, you know, like these things should be cleaning the temple as my soul is trying to inhabit it as I become fully human, instead of trying, you know, that is the great work. And I think all of our stories are doing that kind of thing. The mythology of our time, past, present, and future, are there as a pathway to help us understand who I am in this ocean of chaos. Instead, you know, if we allow the dark sorcerers of the, as you call them, the techno-feudalists, as I call them, the parasitic oligarchs, these are the same, different terms for the same types of things that now we know that through the blue light of our screens, that they are releasing dopamine in our brains, just like you're at Las Vegas pulling the slot machines. It's doing something to us. And so if we come back into our embodied experience and then witness this as the mythology of our times, that you are a living myth and symbols are an actual living structure, that then we can see this world, as David Beth, he calls it, the pandemonic, that it doesn't, we're not looking to go back in time to what some people call the longhouse, you know, through the rising and dying God. We're not looking to go back in time to the matriarchy, the bathhouse, some call it. But what we're looking to do is we're looking to move forward through with progress and tradition and integrate them so that we become the the doorway into the true discovery of the authentic, so the logos can speak through us
We
and we
can
can be
bear
magic.
the sacred, right? Like that our
That's the
ancestors
idea,
don't
yeah.
whisper to us, so
Yes.
that they. So in Plato's Menexenus, and I know that it's an obscure text, but I'll explain just a little bit. In Plato's Menexenus, at the end, Aspasia's, her speech in praise of Cora, in praise of the land in which they find themselves, the place. One of them, and the people, is that, live. Maybe you inherited some money from your ancestor, i.e., wisdom. Maybe you've got, some goods, from the people who have fallen in the past, and they don't want you to take those goods and only sit on the laurels of the greatness of the past, just like Nietzsche said, doing monumental history by itself, just going, the past was great, and we can't do it again. It's like, no, like the past can be brought back here and lived, and when we create and we restore the sacred, so we take our inheritances and do something with them, rather than just being like, oh, already happened, or it never can be. So one of the things about like, we don't want to go back to the past. No, we want the past to be alive, and the only way for it to be alive is if it's in me, and then in the pen, or in the person in front of me, or in the Philip whatever beautiful story that is sitting in front of me. And one of the things that lights me up because I love watching films with my kids, and I love reading books with my kids, but I do think that there is a growing narrative, right, within all the media that children are exposed to today, which is that there are these large, there are these entities, like when we think about the Golden Compass or his Dark Materials, groups of people who benefit when we cut off our spirit, right? They want to figure out how to cut off our spirit, like to separate us finally, fully from what makes us magical, right? Or let's see, in the Matrix, right? The very things that we built are controlling us, right? Like, yes, be wary of all of the things that you create, because then it could become this very overlord to you. Or Dune, the whole problem of colonization, and taking and not appreciating the value of those who see the world literally differently, who relate to the land differently, and then basically painting portraits. This is futile. You can't fight empire. You can't do these things, right? And so what do you think is happening in this growing amount of literature that's trying to remind people of, yes, the little guy can fight empire. You can time travel in such a way as to restore antiquity to the present, so that there could be an actual future again.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to instantly state from my favorite science fiction author besides Frank Herbert is Philip K. Dick, and everybody in this world is going to be all like, we live in an Orwellian world, or we live in a Huxleyan world, right? Brave New World, 1984, and I'm like, yes, but for me, if we're going to ask truly what is the nature of all of this, we have to get back to Philip K. Dick, and he says the empire never ended, and that we live within the black iron prison. And those are very Gnostic terms, but the idea of the empire ended is then it moves on and it states how you have to be weary that when you fight against the empire, that you don't become the empire in its wake. And that goes very back to a very martial arts type of way of seeing things, is that if you meet force with force, you're going to destroy both or become that which you hate. And so we have to take a different angle, be enslaved, create your own system, or be enslaved by another man's, right? William Blake is this idea that the hybridization of things. There are a dark oligarchic parasitic class who have tapped into the psychology of humanity We have a history of it. We know exactly how they started doing it. We know that our internet age is because of it. DARPA, ARPA, CERN, all these things, all these small little branches are here to, it can get very black pill at that time. And the idea of why magic, myth, and meaning are so important is because we can then see that we ourselves, it's our own tyrant king within ourselves that is actually holding us back. And there's no amounts of Palantir, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, the whoever's in the White House at this time, because the false dichotomy of the Hegelian dialectic of left or right is that it's fake. And it's fake because once you realize that there are these tiers and these structures of things, that it's where is the money coming from and how are they pushing a narrative out to there. And so why it's really important to tap into the golden thread of reality, why it's important to tap into this Western esoteric tradition is because of we're going somewhere where it's going to be more magical than we could ever imagine. We're tapping into parts of the brain nervous system nowadays with neurobiology and our sciences where we're seeing instantly, like this whole thing with AI and aliens and how like our fantasies and science fictions and our folklore are all around us at all times. And the idea is that with our magical practices, which tapping into being a Bene Gesserit, to being your own Jedi, is now you're cleansing the perceiving apparatus and you're able to see more things. So if we only have the ability to see the light spectrum, there is so much more than that. And so that's an easy way of knowing that then, same as Wi-Fi, it's all around us, but we don't see it, but we believe it. And so where's that difference between episteme and doxa, the knowledge and opinion? And it's upon the discovery of the true and the authentic and tapping into the forms, which isn't for me an abstraction,
No,
but
not at
a
all.
really lived experience of philosophia itself, of this divine wisdom. And we must do it through divine madness. And when we tap into the madness, not the idea of it's the idea of the mystic swims where the madman drowns. And so it's really important to not, and I'm talking about this all the time in a lot of my talks, is that don't take your visions that you have seriously, jot them down and know they're there, follow the synchronicity, but realize that through philosophy, we can have a concrete experience. And then through people's work like Alfred Korzynski, or S.I. Hiawatha, whatever his name is, the language in action, is that we have abstractions. And that's how our nervous system works. And so we have to understand that there are such words that can be filled in, and that's what is being used against us, right? These terms like changing things like, what does Buddha mean? It means awaken, the awakened one. Well, now we have such terms as woke, and now we have a battle amongst poor people, right? Like, and as the high class up here is just feeding people agendas so that they can war against themselves, and and we're going out and protesting against this no kings, and I'm all like, no, become a king, become a queen, become your own philosopher, king, magician, lover, instead of this, because then Walmart is the one who is, giving the money for the no benefit. You know what I mean? It's like, it's crazy. Like that's what I'm trying to always get at, is like, we need to follow who is putting up these things, who is supporting it, so you can go to these big protest events that seem organic. And that's when we tap into understanding that the Smith effect and the Matrix again is that anyone that is not unplugged from the Matrix is a potential agent, because they don't even know it, because symbolism is a way to move ideology as well. And so as we move through our life and we start to deconstruct and start to do the blackening, right? The negredo. When we start doing that, we are going to start going through existential dread. You're going to start questioning everything you've ever thought of in your life. And that's why you also need a practice. That's why magic is here. That's why mysticism is here, because to me, they're synonymous once you are working towards the vision the vision of the voice, the vision of the forms, and getting yourself out of the cave. But then you must go back into the cave, and you may die doing so, as he states. You know, and everybody that's around in that cave is there to keep you in it. And so it's like anytime you start to stray from your friend groups, they're going to tell you that, man, you've changed. And you look at them and you go, I need to be changing. I can change and
Don't
stay
you
the
wanna
same.
change?
I do want to change, but and it's not even change. It's like, let's change our words. I want to be more authentic. How to become more authentic. And so what I'm seeing in this world, and why I think, you know, why I create Magus in the media, is that myth, magic, meaning, philosophy, esotericism, and the occult have all been hijacked. And we must speak words to power. We must, as Nietzsche called it, you know, if God is dead and we killed him, and we don't have a moral structure anymore that helps prop us up, we must create one. And to create one is then another way. I think we need to flip it on its side and say, don't create it, discover it, because the moral structures are already there for us. And it doesn't have to take from the past. But once we start tapping into the magical, time and space itself is not but a construct of the mind. Now we're tapping into something that is ever present and eternal. And that gets us back to the pre-Socratic, you know, and the Platonic and like what Homer was dealing with. And we're dealing with these like mystery traditions, and we're dealing with these things happening right now. It's just, this is the newest form of the Inquisition. And we all have to be practicing within our own temples and within our homes, and then out there speaking it to the people, but understanding that language is the way to gather more people. And that goes back to Philip K. Dick, is that when asked the question, what is reality? He says it's that which doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. And I think it's this Ouroboros, infinite snake eating its own tail type of thing, where we're continually confused. And I think that's actually really important.
And this is what I love about your show and about your way of thinking and living philosophically, spiritually, so on and so forth, is so many people, you know, have what, you know, hippy dippy worldviews, woo woo worldview, Gnostic worldviews, esoteric worldviews, but it's one of the reasons why I am oriented towards the world the way I am is because it's not that there's no disrespect. It's just, it could be stronger. Give yourself a discipline. Read the text. Go to antiquity. Know what Plato or Iamblichus said, because I promise you, it's going to help you with your tarot. It's going to help you with understanding Philip K. Dick, right? It's going to wake it up in such a way that you see that it's not just mere entertainment. It's not just how boys escape into the realm of, you know, what are those video games, the Dark Souls or whatever. You know, like when you're just playing those games, you just think, well, then it's easy to get caught up in the lore of the people who benefit from you thinking that, you know, it's good to be, you know, a villain or a tyrant. Because I feel like sometimes that's exactly what the techno-feudalists, they want us to hate ourselves. They want us to be afraid. So don't be a narcissist. Don't be mean. Be nice. Best practices. All of this kind of stuff, to where, like, if you aren't, you know, plugged in, if you will, to what virtue is in antiquity, and it's not, you know, bless your heart virtue. It's not just be kind to make pies virtue. No, it's the virtue of going back down into the cave and screaming, wake up. And, you know, possibly being treated like crap, right? Or murdered, or assassinated, or whatever it might be. And so anyways, that was my long-winded way of being like, thank you, because this is the kind of work that needs to be done, right, on your podcast, to get those people who are esoteric curious, bringing it into like, hey, look, everything that we watch, right, is inviting us into certain ways of life. And if you have a certain paideia, if you have a certain education, that education can stop you from going down the madness that makes you drown versus the madness that you can swim in, and know that you are part of participating in recreating the world. And that, yes, we can have renaissances. We can change our technologies. We can change the way that we view money. Oh, gosh, how frightened would the techno-feudalists become if everybody en masse started to realize, wait, we can recreate the world because look, there's been many times now. Let's remember that world too will crumble, but that's okay, because that means there'll be another generation that will keep doing this work. And so, we've got philosophers like John Vervaeke and others who are talking about the meaning crisis, right? And I believe this meaning crisis has been around for forever, right? But what happens when we realize that why everybody is feeling this existential dread all of the time is because out there are people making decisions that they think this will benefit us if everybody is just so weighed down by this waking up, right? Let's give them a little bit of the waking up juice so that they can see meaninglessness, they can see the problem of selfhood, they can see the cutoffness, right? And like Mark said, right, like the technologies of one relationship of production is going to produce the technologies that allow for new modes of production, unbeknownst to the capitalist who benefits from the previous order, right? They have created technologies that allow for new ways of being in the world. And so sometimes I think to myself, well, they've created this mass despair. And yeah, it would benefit them if we stayed in that. But what if we use this mass despair to wake up even further, right? To our power to create entire worlds, whether they be Platonic or Gnostic or Egyptian or Sumerian. That's the real beauty, right? Because again, for a Platonist, and I know you're also a Platonist, but I think what you're trying to get at, like when you're talking about like the magic, right, is no, just like in the book 5 of the Republic, I'm reaching towards the beautiful, the good, the true. That absolutely is, even in the lie. How beautiful that it's in the lie, that it's in the story about 3 little pigs. That it's in everything. And that for me is, to go back to William Blake, that is the, to see the world in a grain of sand moment. And so,
that's good. I like that. And 2 things come to mind as you're talking about that is like the marriage of heaven and hell, right? Where Mircea Eliade's sacred and the profane, right? And then a lot of the Gnostic myths, they believe that, and Philip K. Dick questions this type of thing, and he's bringing it up a lot. He's all like, how do you know that, and we see it in a lot of our magical societies, that this isn't the underworld? How do we know that we're not the dead ones? And that whatever is trying to help wake us up, if it's not myself, the part of me that's awoke, my higher angel, my genius, whatever it is that seems like it's from the outside, isn't the alive ones. And they're trying to move us through the underworld so we can finally unite with our soul that is within us, that's part of our spark, right? That's the Lurianic Kabbalah of the Qliphoth, right? If you have the tree of life, which is the 10 spheres and the 22 paths, underneath it is the roots of the tree, and the roots of the tree are the shards of the first expulsion of the divine that tried to create the all. The everything, the kingdom that we live within. It didn't work. It had to do it again. And now, as the Buddhists say, we are here trying to, as a bodhisattva would, help those of us who are awake, help those who aren't, who are the husks and the hollow, but there are divine shards within all of them. And we are trying to pull those divine shards back up to the divinity, the kether, or the ein sof, or whatever it is. The other thing that comes to mind as I thinking about that is how only through despair, through somebody reading like Kierkegaard, only through his fear and trembling, did I fully come to understanding that despair isn't something that's just like I'm depressed.
Right.
Despair is this deep, like existential angst is something deep, deep within us that doesn't just go away. And I feel like that we are continually trying to mask existential despair with the same drugs that are given to us by these things that are actually putting us into despair. And so it's fascinating that we want to take the supplements and or drugs from the people. It's Stockholm syndrome at its finest. We're taking the thing from the people who are putting us into those things. Funny enough, the only true way to get out of that level of despair is to realize you're the one who put yourself there. And so it goes back to something we've talked about before about victimization, is that the only true way I'm being victimized if I do it to myself, because even as we've learned when I was in college, Boethius and his constellation philosophy was one of those mindscapes where I was like, holy shit, this guy who is a bishop or whatever, who is now being imprisoned, didn't call upon God, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever. He called upon Sophia, Philosophia. He called upon Lady Philosophia because he realized that it was something you could take away all of everything around me, but what you can't take away from me is my heart mind, my astral temple, my palace, that is the thinking thing that is not even a thinking thing, because as Robert Anton Wilson calls it, who is the master who makes the grass green? And then nothing, right? I will continue to look for the person who's thinking and I will never find it. And that is the secret of how you can never truly be taken over by the machine, is because there is nothing to find and there is nobody to imprison.
No, I mean, the example I use with my students, and some of them don't get this example anymore because, again, I'm a child of the 90s and I'm slowly becoming outdated. But it's got an actor in it that not many people like anymore. But the scene in Braveheart where Braveheart is on their back and he screams, "Freedom!"
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Yeah, and this is the basic principle of Stoicism, or the basic principle of Plato's Phaedo, right? Where be not afraid, right? Because once you tap into that part of yourself, right, that is something that cannot be controlled, then you discover the Neo, you discover the Alex, right? You discover and remember, as you appealed to earlier, all of these characters that have been lighting you, guiding you, right, with their archetypical form, right, speaking to you, through your very mantras that you took in, right, because you found them therapeutic, but not therapeutic in the sense as you're saying, in this deadening kind of therapy, where it's like, oh, this is a problem that you feel despair, so let me diagnose you and give you all of these things, versus no, like, you need the angst, you need the despair, you need your joy to be wed with a recognition that it's fleeting, right? Like, if we don't remember that life is complex and it's moving and it's shaking, and that there is no happiness, that everything is all perfect and we all sit around
Kumbaya-ing.
I was like, that's what my mother would say, is singing Kumbaya or whatever not. But that's the thing, is that, like, we can sit around and we can make songs and we can make a beautiful place, but that doesn't mean that women won't have to suffer the loss of their children, and men won't have to prepare for wars and things like these things will always exist, because people. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you earlier when I was thinking about Marx, right? Because one of the things that is so maddening and frustrating is that it benefits certain people who make the media that we have now, or reinforce the world that we have right now, that abstracts ideas like the good, the true, and the just, or abstracts stories to be mere stories and not guideposts that we can internalize and live. That we think that human nature is by nature bad, right? This is why if we have a renaissance, it will fall, it will crumble. I mean, you mentioned this earlier about the tyrant, right? That ultimately, like, don't make new things. Don't go after the good, because ultimately, come on, guys, human nature is one where everybody's out for power and sex and drugs.
Sluggish, brutish, and short, as Hop would say.
So that Danny, Layne, and and Brandon, they're just talking a good game, trying to inspire hope, but they just want to be puppet masters because that's human nature. And so, to kind of wrap up, give ourselves a few more minutes to be thinking about, like, who benefits from us thinking that we're all bad guys, right? But, right, since today's episode, I'm really trying to target the audience of, like, people who are entering this world of the occult, the magical. Something I think is fun is, what are the conspiracy theories, right, that you think are problematic, right? Like if you want to give some budding person who's going down these rabbit holes, like, a kind of warning, right? Red flag, be careful here. What would you think those are? And then what are the realities, quote unquote, that you also think are problematic? You kind of mentioned one with regards to big pharma and pharmaceuticals. So just, like, those two kinds of things. And then I'll ask you probably what your favorite Platonic text is and why.
Oh, I love that. Okay, good. So the first one that kind of comes to mind, especially for those if they are in the academic world or moving into the occult world and these different things, it's first to understand that the occult isn't bad, right? It just means hidden. And esoteric isn't something that is for just a select few of the rich people, but it's a mental state. It's a level of awareness. Esoteric is like, you have the idea of, like, if you go to church, the exoteric is all of those in the pews. You have a priest. He's the only one who can divine from the gods, and we all go, and then you leave, and then you don't think about it. The esoteric is different than that. The esoteric means that it's for a select few, because of only a select few can have gnosis, right? It's for all. Magic is for all. However, it's not an easy journey. And so one of the biggest, what happens with the New Age spiritual thing is that we start to believe that it's easier the deeper you get into it, and that's not true. The deeper you delve into the unconscious, or the deeper you delve into your own lower desires and trying to figure those things out, the harder it's going to get, because of it's you have to continue digging, and then until you reach a place where now life is moving with you. And so that's the first thing. Second thing is that Aleister Crowley is not evil, and that if you're an academic out there, you should read his work, because he is brilliant. There are so many mythologies and discrediting of his work, and I think that it's really important that, especially as academics, to realize that he wrote in a way that unveils your own perception of things through time and your own scare tactics, because he wasn't rebelling against Christianity. He was trying to understand his own dogma to the Christian Puritanism that he was raised in. And so if you want to truly understand what magic is, I think his work is necessary. And then to not get hung up in the allegory of certain terms, which as magicians we have written in code, cryptography. John Dee was a cryptographer, right? And all of we write as it's like a recipe book, because the profane eye will take these things, as we learned in Disney's Sorcerer's Apprentice, and you will fuck up. And so, you will mess up, right? Sorry. But this idea is that we need to read it as we're reading anything. When you're reading Plato, when you're reading Aristotle, and when you're reading Heidegger or any of these people, you need to know the language that they're using. And upon doing so, it elucidates and unveils truth, aletheia, right? It unconceals, it discloses it to us. So that's another thing that I want to state, is that I think it's really important. He gets thrown out. I myself in my own life picked up Rigardi's big black book of the Golden Dawn. And as much as I rail on the Golden Dawn, it has been important for me, because then I always want to go back to where did they get their stuff from? And you just continue to figure out where they're getting their work from until you hit something that resonates with your soul and your nervous system, so that you can easily go upon figuring out how to have a practice. And so that's the thing, is that we can't just be armchair magicians, just like we can't be armchair philosophers. You have to not only read the work, you have to participate in the experience of philosophy, just like you must participate in the experience of the world. Another thing is that in this day and age, I've been doing a lot of work on it on Magus and the Media on my show, is that there is a continual basis to push Abrahamic traditions and then demolish anything that seems to be occulted. And that is another brainwash mind control to make it so you don't want to look into what is hidden in secret from the profane eye. And so the idea is that it's all Baal worship and Moloch and baby blood drinking and all these strange things, when really, when you're watching somebody do magic, it's more like you're sitting, or you're doing your drama and your ritual or your meditation, your mysticism, and it's a lot like studying philosophy. Introspection, reflection, rinse, repeat, study more, write, continue writing, and clear away, doing the alchemy of yourself to get into that stuff. Philosophers out there, you need to know that as much as as smart as you think you are, you don't know as much as you think you know. And that's the first plight of what Socrates is trying to tell you, and why you kicked him out of Athens. You did it. You killed God, not anybody else. And that's the idea, is that like we have, framed academia in this world, that it's like anybody outside of it you haven't published, right? You haven't written a book. You haven't done this or that. That means you're not as the fallacy of authoritarianism, a fallacy of authority, is that, well, yeah, like all those things are good. Obviously I want to write a book, and obviously I want to get published in these types of things. But at the same time, if your family life is in shambles, if your body isn't representing the way you want to represent it forward, it's like there are charlatans and snake oil salesmen everywhere. And so you just have to get good enough at knowing who they are and what they look like, because as they say, the fruits, you can see it in their fruits. And then at the same time, never cast pearls before swine. So there's no need to talk to people about things that they're not interested in. That doesn't mean I don't like to push the gamut and like prod and to see, because what if you prod at this person, but their friend was listening, and then this person walks away, and then that friend comes up and is all like, that was actually kind of interesting. Huh. What was I like Dune. Should I read that? And I'm all like, yes, you should, because that can then spark this huge initiatory process. And that's another myth. Initiation isn't just for institutions. Initiation is the beginning. That's what it means. And so you don't have to be a Golden Dawn member or a Martinist or some shitty Rosicrucian thing that's not real anymore, because that was back in the 1600s. Like you don't have to be a part of the AA or Thelema, which I can't stand. I can't stand Thelema. The AA is brilliant, so that's why I'm saying read Crowley. But like, the idea is that life is the initiation, and that's why we're Platonists, right? Is that we believe that when we're walking amongst the world and we go out in nature, that these are two aspects of the beautiful, and it teaches us the virtues of how to live the good life and to be happy, right? Eudaimonia isn't just happiness because my lower desires are in check. Happiness is the middle path. Why it's funny where what did you say, Magus in the middle? Funny enough, when you said that, I'm all like, well, it's right, because there is no left and right path. There is only the middle path, right?
And that's Eros, right? The erotic.
That is the erotic. And that is something that you and I both have a lot in common, where we have this passion, this divine madness, this Eros, this leads us to the true. And I think that's really important, because what it looks like when somebody is impassioned with Eros. not only in, the bedroom or, all these places. That's a place for it. But it's really is like when we can reflect in a way and speak true. Another thing I was thinking of is Crowley wrote a book called The Book of Lies. And it's funny because it's a book of aphorisms that, when read, that unleash truth. And if we can understand that everything we ever say is a lie, because all words are metaphors and alluding to something else. And that is one of the biggest realizations we can have, is that everything you say is a lie, because none of it's actually true, because you're trying to speak about something. Like when I use the term well, my drink, but this is red. Well, what does red mean? And now you're just talking about all of the things, never actually understanding red. And then from a neuroscience aspect, you're not actually seeing red, you're seeing blue, or the aspect that's not there. And so there's a few, that's my rambling on that. But there's so much conspiracy in the occult world, that it's in the esoteric world, that the waters are so muddied. And it makes me think of the idea of the Philosopher's Stone. And why I think about that is because it's the red powder test that they say and they speak about in a lot of old texts. And what it is that you get the wise old sage, and he knows the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, this immortal elixir of life that can create from nothingness, which isn't supposed to be possible, and that has the ability to change lead to gold, right? This metaphorical allegory of actually creating the spirit and the soul and letting it rise up into the highest apotheosis, the form of God, unification. But the idea of the trick is that he gives somebody who's seeking after and questing after this Philosopher's Stone, and so he gives him a red powder and he disappears, right? The supernatural always shows up and then just disappears. And so to test his student, he's all like, here's a Philosopher's Stone, gives him the red powder, he disappears. And now that student goes out, and make a long story short, he starts creating gold. And that's an obvious trap, because we're not seeking after success. We're not seeking after monetary gain or anything that's going to continue to lift up our lower animal desires. And what he does is then he uses that gold that he just created from his Philosopher's Stone, and then he goes buys a bunch of things. And then he's back at his home, and all of a sudden he's got a whole raging masses of people outside looking for their things back, because the gold he just gave them disappeared. And then the man was then like, whatever bad things happened to him, he then continued to seek after the sage, and the sage never came back to him, because he failed the test. Because that test is, I think, what we're being tested with on a daily basis. And that is, can we accept the call to adventure? And upon that call to adventure, can we continue to do the right thing, be authentic, and not be afraid to fall? But then at the same time, are we able to get ourselves out of our own trap when we trap ourselves? And I think that when we see these things through the allegory and the myth, we can understand the same thing that Robert Anton Wilson talked about in the 70s and 80s and 90s, where he stated that the Illuminati, this thing that we're afraid of, yes, the Illuminati are real, the Bavarian Illuminati created by Adam Weishaupt in the same time frame, 1776. There's a lot of stuff going on with that. Scientific materialism. All these secret societies that have done terrible things, most of them have been infiltrated just by bad people. And so people cannot be perfected, which is why I don't think communism or socialism ever works, because the humans are not perfectible. But there are certain ideologies that need that to happen. And so that's why, to me, these things can't work. But there are ways of going about it. And the idea is that if we all understand that me and my closest 5 people around me are the Illuminati that I think are controlling me, then I can put the control back into me and my small group of people. And then if we have the ability to organize correctly and continue to do our great work, the alchemy of life, then we can make small change. And that small change is all it takes for massive movements to happen. And then it can be an organic movement. And then it doesn't have to be all Tavistock, Palantir, the deep state, these black government events and these different things. And
You don't even have to acknowledge the reality at some point, right? Like
Yes.
like this is the, Epicurean kind of, tend to your garden, right?
Yes.
Like let the world of deep state and, big, conglomerates, let them, as Jesus says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right?
Yes.
Like I couldn't care less about your coin, right?
Yep.
And that's the point, is that, like, look, they won't go away. Like let's go now and read some good books together, and let's start building worlds rather than trying to make those worlds. Let's. Like when you say, hey, you're not even worth my time anymore. I know what my power is, and I know that you could take away all sorts of things. But just like we said earlier with, Mel Gibson's Braveheart, you can't take away the kernel that caused me to be a force with which to be reckoned, right?
I agree. And that is the part of us. I'm always telling my students, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. People ask me, well, I've never been in a fight before. Why would I need to learn martial arts? And I'm all like, that's stupid. You need to learn how to use your body. And there's no other feeling like when you're moving in the grass in front of your home with a sword in your hand and you know exactly where to go. It is as if you are Achilles on the battlefield. It's as if you are your favorite anime character. It's as if you are your favorite hero, no matter what they are. And I think it's important in all aspects. Why do I need to learn philosophy? I'm not going to become a philosopher. I'm all like, no, you are a philosopher. It is your duty to society to formulate and harmonize that tripartite soul, right? We see it in the Trinity in Link and Zelda, right? It's in all things and it's all places. And when we harmonize those things, we can become the philosopher, king, warrior, lover, queen that we truly are. And my last thing would be to state that the same kind of thing we learn in our introduction to philosophy courses, which means you must steel man arguments to then be able to break them down and to realize if they are true or not, is the exact same thing you need to bring to magic and the Western esoteric tradition. You steel man these arguments because every major philosopher was also an alchemist, a magician, an occultist. And I think that is the most important thing for us to understand.
Brandon, it has been an extreme pleasure to have you on. In fact, I hope to have you back on next month, or maybe on a weekly basis, to do like a movie series or something like this. I just get inspired. So please check out Magus in the media, also the middle, and very fun stuff, but also initiatory, but also just down to earth, reminding us that the stories we tell each other and the stories that we imbibe and create are very much a part of the spirit of the Platonic tradition, very much about being inspired by the good. So thank you, Brandon. I keep wanting to call you Magus, by the way.
Yeah, you and everybody else does. Yeah.
All right. So last thing before we close, to make it short and sweet, because I'm going to make it the beginning of the next time we talk to each other.
I love this.
What is your favorite dialogue and why?
No, perfect. And this is short and sweet. Magus in the middle isn't about me, Magus. It's that magic is in all things, just so everybody knows. My favorite dialogue is the same one I already brought up, and it's the Phaedrus. A lot of, the Republic, I have it actually sitting right here so I can always read it. But the Phaedrus is the most important thing for me because it talks about the charlatan, talks about the sophist, talks about writing and how important writing is, at the same time how detrimental writing is, how it's got that Promethean spirit, right? That Prometheus fire can do both things. Writing can both save lives and kill them. Then it gives us the idea of divine madness and eros, and how to truly speak to the muses and let them speak through us. And so the Phaedrus changed my life when I was in my younger 20s, in my college years, trying to remix it. Because that was read the Phaedrus and now remix it, and I actually chose to read the Phaedrus to then remix it. I wrote a long poem, a spoken word poem on that, and I listened to an instrumental version of Radiohead's In Rainbows album, and then I wrote my version of the Phaedrus by taking all the bits of the Phaedrus. And so for me, that divine madness has been, that eros has been something that has sparked me through my whole life. And I want to help others with the word, and to help spark passion amongst everyone else too. So that's...
Well, you certainly do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh dear